Many of you don't know, but Lightning Warrior was my very first review on this channel, that is, before I deleted it. The old review gave no justice to this franchise, and I'll be damned if I didn't come back and do a proper review of it, this time with the entire trilogy. So what is Lightning Warrior exactly? It is an old school erotic dungeon crawling JRPG where you as a player explore dungeons and battle sexy monster girls in turn-based combat with a reward of stripping them naked upon victory. As with every dungeon crawler, you level up, find better gear, and beat bosses in order to advance in the game. What separates Lightning Warrior from other dungeon crawlers out there is its heavy emphasis on girl-on-girl action, which the series is best known for. There are sex scenes involving men as well, but nowhere else will you find so much lesbian hentai when it comes to this genre. Now that you know what Lightning Warrior is, let's talk a little about its history. Originally released in 1994 by a Japanese company named ZyX, Raidy found its way to Western audience well over a decade later through a video game localization company specialized in ero games named G Collections, which was also a Japanese company, now replaced by Just USA. While Japan had already enjoyed Lightning Warrior Raidy 2 only 2 years after the first game, that is 1996, in 2008 the rest of the world was just hearing about a brave young warrior with long red hair wearing a sexy armor for the very first time. It took 2 years from there for the West to catch up with the second title, and after 2012, Japan was already enjoying a full story that was the Lightning Warrior Raidy trilogy. It would take all the way to 2015 for the West to get their hands on the third game. Little did many know that on the same year, 2015, ZyX had already released their spin-off game in Japan, Raidy 3.5 Forezuki ki Patsu, starring one of the side characters, a dark elf with obsession of giving people enemas. However, the game did not come without its delays. Raidy 3.5 was originally promised to be released June 2014, but met several pushbacks, which led to its release on 2015, only a couple of months in between with the West just getting Lightning Warrior Raidy 3. Not following the typical localization pattern of 2 years, Raidy 3.5 is unfortunately yet to be translated into English. I happen to own the game, and I would have loved to include it to this review, but it would have only delayed the video, which was already way past its deadline. But don't worry, I will definitely make a review of it in the future. Lastly, I might as well point out the fact that Lightning Warrior Raidy 1 and 2 are actually remakes inspired by the original titles. Even though I consider myself a hardcore fan of the series, I never played them, and I probably never will since they are too old in my taste, so they won't get a further mention in this review. With the history out of the way, it's finally time to talk about the games themselves. Enter the first Lightning Warrior Raidy. With little to no better introduction, we see Raidy standing in front of a dungeon tower, narrating by herself the reason behind this unusual straightforward beginning. She tells to have stopped for supplies at a small village called Zad, which happens to be in great need of a hero. Inhabited with mostly elders inside, she was told that the young women of the village were kidnapped by monsters living in a dungeon tower, while the men went to rescue them, only to never return. While the intro is far from anything good, I acknowledge that ZyX could have been running with a small budget back then, seeing how the company was founded the same year this game came out, that is 1994. What appears as a rushed start for the game still gives enough to work with. We now know what type of person Raidy is, and it was even mentioned that she already carries the title of Lightning Warrior, so Raidy is no stranger to danger. Well, Raidy might be a little rusted, I would say. She just lost to her first enemy in a combat that offers only 2 types of attacks. And no, that was not scripted. I actually did manage to lose to my first enemy of the game. Perhaps that would not have happened if the game simply displayed enemies' health and level, which would have warned me that I was fighting against something which I had no chance to win. Sure, I could have ran, but fuck if I know to do that when I don't even realize being in danger before it's too late. I don't know how much health that thing got, all I know is how much damage I do. Needless to say, that's not enough information to go with. So the first game locks you inside a single dungeon with multiple floors to explore. The atmosphere is gloomy and mysterious, which is exactly what a dungeon tower should feel like for the most part. But being trapped there for an entire game, it can feel depressing at times, to be honest. It's nothing new that the dungeon crawler uses a small texture palette to paint its levels, but in Lightning Warrior the walls and corridors never change before final level, so there's very little variation to appreciate. The level design generally follows a simple pattern where all you have to do is find a boss room key in order to fight the boss. Along the way you come across monster girls which you battle in the most simplistic turn-based combat I have ever seen in a video game. But hey, this game came out 1994, so I don't want to be too harsh on it. In combat, upon defeating the monsters, the clothes get thrown off for your viewing pleasure. I must say, the artwork can be quite beautiful to look at, and I found myself enjoying many of the designs. There are 18 monster girls plus 6 bosses and some events here and there to enjoy, so enough of adult content to justify the purchase based on where the price stands today. The bosses are the jewel of the game, offering adult scenes led by talented voice acting. There are always 2 events for each boss, win and lose. In Lightning Warrior, losing to a boss is a reward of its own. If defeated in battle, Raidy gets punished by the boss, and these scenes can often be quite fantastic, so I encourage you to lose to a boss once before attempting to win them. But remember to save before rushing to lose a battle, because the game works on manual save. There are no checkpoints, and each defeat sends you right back to the title screen. Multiple save files are recommended because the game has a potential to screw you over majorly. This is true to all of the Lightning Warrior games. Though I enjoy the hentai scenes where Raidy gets punished, I find it quite frustrating having to lose on purpose. I understand that this was necessary in order for it to be logical for Raidy to get punished, but it just feels a little bit unnecessary that the game won't unlock these scenes to gallery automatically upon finishing the game. What if I don't want to bother losing to each boss and I just want to play the game? Well, too bad, because then I don't get to enjoy half of the hentai scenes. What I also don't find pleasant experience is the forced use of dialogue options that always requires 2 clicks on think and 2 clicks on talk before Raidy can even consider battling the bosses.
Well, that was a load of shit.
Look, if you want to have dialogue in your game, just have it. Don't make me work for what is bound to happen anyway. Seriously, it's so tedious having to repeat the same steps with each boss. You enter the boss room, talk twice, think twice, and then start the battle. You probably think that I'm whining over a small thing, and it probably is just that, but these things surprisingly add up towards frustration as you keep playing the game for long. The same is true to rooms you find inside the dungeon. There are empty rooms with painted background that gives you 2 options, look and investigate. The look option serves absolutely no purpose whatsoever for the entire game, and it always gives you the same old answer. This obviously is just illusion of choice, and very poor one at that, I may add. Not once will you ever see this option offering anything new to say. The look option, on the other hand, serves a purpose. With it, Raidy takes a look at the room and may discover an important item that can be used to defeat a boss, for example. However, here's the twist. There are rooms where Raidy needs to look not once, not twice, but 3 times before she notices something on the floor. This is downright sadistic game design. I can't believe a human being came up with this idea. How am I supposed to expect that I need to check the same room 3 times before an item appears when the game has given me no reason to believe this is something that may happen later on? And we are not talking about an Easter egg surprise or hidden extra item, but an actual important item required to beat the game. There are countless empty rooms in all of the levels, and for the most part they don't have anything in them. By the time when items start to appear in some of the rooms, you have already grown tired of them with belief they serve no purpose in the game. And I would not blame you for thinking that. The dungeons are designed to be quite complex along with their puzzles. Fake walls are often a way to advance rather than hiding extra items and secrets behind them. This would not be a problem by itself if not for the minimap. You see, you must find a map inside a floor you are trapped in before the minimap gets revealed. It's the same as in Zelda games. Harmless design can totally work, but ZyX made sure this simple experience would prove to be the end of the player's hopes and dreams. At least it was for me. Many of the puzzles are designed to be solved with the help of the minimap, but the map is often placed beyond the puzzle, not before it, thus defeating the purpose. These puzzles soon become extremely frustrating to solve, and despite having played this game multiple times before, I still need to rely on walkthrough guide to get past one of the game's more demanding puzzles. I shit you not, I was lost in one of them for over an hour trying to solve it before admitting defeat. Character direction is the key here. Once you do get the minimap, however, the exploration of the dungeon gets much more enjoyable. Now you can actually see where you are going, and you have a chance to make an educated guess where the fake walls may be located without having to randomly bash your head on each wall hoping to find one. With broken level design, unfortunately the combat doesn't even try to make up for it. The combat, though old and experimental, offers absolutely no challenge whatsoever. This is true to each and every Lightning Warrior game in the series, something that frustrates me beyond belief. But I will cover the evolution of the combat system with each title. For the first game, you simply spam attack button to win each battle, and every once in a while you have to remember to drink a health potion to keep on your toes. Using defend is an absolute waste of a turn simply because the enemies do not indicate when they are about to unleash a more powerful attack, so you might as well aim for the maximum damage with each turn. The Lightning Slash ability, which works on MP, is simply just another basic attack. It deals no significant damage compared to your sword attack, and at times it even deals less than that. Ignoring it completely will not hinder your success in battle, and it is something I recommend to do simply because it's much easier to keep your mouse on the one attack button without having to bother to move it. Other than that, there's absolutely nothing else to say about the combat really. You spam the attack till you win and move on, that's it. If the enemy level happens to be far too big for you to defeat them, sure, you can flee from battle, that's a feature. Another problem with the combat I find extremely tedious is the game's forced grinding after defeating a boss. The next level monsters are often greater level than you if you have not stayed behind to grind for some more extra levels. In my opinion, defeating a boss is a proof that I'm capable to move on, that I should be strong enough to face the new enemies. But no, since there's no balancing done right, many times I had to return to former floors to grind for more levels. And don't get me wrong, I'm no stranger to grinding in video games. I actually find it charming when done right. Heck, I used to play Lineage 2 for over 9 years and the game is notorious for its grinding. But to best describe what forced grinding looks like in Lightning Warrior, just take a look for yourself. It just hit me. This has been a lot of negative talk for one game. I apologize if you were expecting something good. Truth to be told, I actually chose to review this game with memory of it being good. Lightning Warrior was a game that made me a fan of dungeon crawler genre, and while the first title holds a special place in my heart for nostalgic reasons, the first Lightning Warrior game suffers from poor design choices that cause unnecessary frustration within the player. There's so many design flaws that together they make a game that is simply not fun to play, unless you are a newcomer to the genre, thus not knowing any better, or you like to punish yourself for some adult content for no better reason. The only saving grace of this game is its hentai. Just like with JK Hazard, if you have seen that review from me, the hentai is so good that it has a potential to forgive everything bad in the game. The hentai is what made me fall in love with the series in the first place. The character designs are captivating, and while the story in the first one is quite simplistic and straightforward, it sets a foundation for later titles to build upon. If I had begun playing Lightning Warrior from the second title or third one, I would not appreciate the story and the characters as much as I do. There's just something magical having been there from the very beginning and meeting the joyful faces that stick with Raidy for the rest of the series. The last thing I can say about the hentai is that the artwork of the enemies you face in the dungeon are cute and quite sharp and well drawn, something which I have enjoyed time and time again in the gallery which you unlock after completing the game. The bosses are the main attraction, with flashy entrances that build well towards the sex scene, and if not for them, Lightning Warrior would have very little fun to offer. Don't get me wrong though, the boss battles themselves are downright laughable. It is the atmosphere and the sex scene that follow at the end which captures my interest. But is that alone a reason to justify the purchase? I think not. Unfortunately, the game has aged badly, and I don't think a modern gamer today would find pleasure in its simplistic design when the market is wide open for more options to choose from. While I can't recommend the game with open heart, it would be unjustified to say to stay away from it. It definitely has its moments of joy, and if you can look past the flaws, you may find the first game surprisingly addicting to complete. There's always that voice in the back of your head saying, one more level, let's see what the next boss and monsters will look like. And I think that's a great way to drive the player to complete the game, because rarely if ever the game disappoints you when it comes to the monster and boss designs. With that said, we still have 2 more games to review. Let's see if ZyX learned from their mistakes to improve the sequel. Enter Lightning Warrior Raidy, Temple of Desire. With Raidy having defeated the final boss from the first game, she once again is on a journey to unknown that would lead her to her next big adventure. This time, Raidy is given more reason to make a journey than just wanting to become a strong warrior. She is looking for someone, but this someone would only be revealed later in the third game. Raidy's journey takes her to a town called Lake Blue, where she hopes to rest and resupply, but of course, trouble finds her once again when she decides to stay at a local inn where a bandit attacks in an attempt to kidnap the innkeeper, who is, you guessed it, a lovely young lady. And get this, the game takes quite a long step trying to let you know that this girl could possibly be jailbait. This time around, many of the issues seen in the first game are a thing of the past. ZyX threw out the dungeon map completely, and now the minimap updates itself constantly, making it much more easier and pleasant experience to navigate the dungeons. The world is expanded and Raidy is no longer locked in one dungeon for the rest of the game. Now the player is able to exit dungeons at will and return to the town to take a break from all the fighting. This town would not only offer the chance for the player to buy gear and items, replenish health, etc., but it also hides several hentai scenes to be discovered, making it ever more joyful experience to revisit the place every now and then. The empty rooms that repeat themselves over and over again now have some variety to them, and they even hide some extra stuff like discs that have hentai scenes in them. This, however, does not fix the awful fact that you still have to check every single room to make sure you don't miss anything important. It's as tedious as it was before. The only positive I can say about it is that at least by now you know how it works, so you don't make the mistake to ignore them and later face the consequence by having to backtrack. The fake walls are no longer a problem, thanks to the minimap that gives some idea of their possible location. This is how it should be. The minimap doesn't tell where they are, but it gives a fair chance for you to figure out and put the pieces together on your own. On top of that, the more demanding puzzles from the first game reappear here as well, but thanks to the minimap, they don't cause unfair challenge. The forced grinding from the first game is heavily reduced, something which only appears at the start of the game, but soon vanishes completely, allowing you to progress with steady pace. Now it is your own choice whether you want to stay behind to level up some more, something which is encouraged rather than forced, thanks to the currency system introduced in this one. The gold you gain from defeating monsters and finding treasure chests allow Raidy to buy potions and better gear at the town, something which is much needed on her travel. The pacing also feels more right this time. I was no longer forced to grind for levels after defeating a boss, but depending on how I had prepared my journey prior to entering a dungeon, I had a fighting chance to make it further while under-leveled. There is a new feature of Raidy being able to wield two weapons at the same time. By sacrificing the shield slot, Raidy can equip a second sword to have two strikes in one turn. The extra damage easily makes Raidy a force not to be reckoned with, maybe too powerful in my taste, but it's there as an option. The Thunder Slash ability makes a return with improved mechanic. This time the player is able to charge it, filling a meter on the right. The more there's charges, the greater the damage turns out to be as you unleash it next turn. It opens up a possibility to face tougher enemies, and no longer does it feel like just another basic attack. This was a welcome improvement, but perhaps far too powerful, seeing how I could slay all the bosses with it without breaking a sweat. An odd addition to the combat is a later skill Raidy learns, which is Ecstasy Attack. It is a single strike that empties all your mana to deliver a devastating blow to the enemy, but where the skill fails beyond my wildest belief is the fact that your Thunder Slash is 3 times more powerful than the Ecstasy Strike, even with low charges, and it doesn't empty your mana. They also made it so that you have to return to town to refill it every single time you use it, and I'm not talking about refilling your mana, but actually refilling your sword's ecstasy that allows you to use it.
All that for a drop of blood.
ZyX, what the hell were you thinking? I was so astonished by this skill that I didn't want to believe any game developer in their right mind would ever consider this a good idea. I thought I just didn't know how to use it properly. But no, that's how the attack works, and there's no further purpose for it in the entire game besides progressing the story in cutscenes. ZyX, you added a single new ability to your combat system and you managed to fuck that up? How is that even possible? The magic of the combat in the second game reveals itself in form of managing resources rather than having complex combat mechanics. Gaining gold in order to afford potions, return stones and better gear is fun enough to keep the grinding meaningful, something which the first game was missing completely. While you can still find better gear in treasure chests, the gold that you may also find in them will lead you to top tier items much quicker, if you are willing to put the extra time to find them, that is. The sad thing about the combat is that somewhere in the middle of the game, you reach that point in both level and gear where money serves you no purpose any longer. No enemy can defeat you, and you got plenty of potions and max health to survive any dungeon without having to go back to town. At this point, the experience returns right back to the first game's problem. Yet again, Lightning Warrior fails to impress me in its combat, one of its cornerstones besides hentai. I do understand that this game was released 1996, so it's still a very old game, so sure, let's not be too harsh on the combat. When it comes to hentai in Temple of Desire, ZyX added animations, though very subtle, they did manage to improve the overall feel of the boss scenes. Along the journey, the game will introduce many new characters, some with comedic relief. One of them is a male bandit named Junk, who is more than willing to betray his leader to have a single blowjob from Raidy, who instead is forced to take the deal in order to gain a boss room key from it. While nothing far too funny worth to praise about, scenes like this did show how much the second game had changed in atmosphere. Temple of Desire told the first real story where the main villain had real motivation and some level of personality. It was worthwhile to discover the master plan behind all the kidnappings and discover that the roots of all evil dig deeper than town of Lake Blue. The second game would not end without giving me a reason to wait for the third game with excitement. But don't let me sugarcoat this too much. The story is just a backseat fun, an extra layer that doesn't really show itself that often beyond the first couple hours to the game and towards the end of it. Something very unfortunate to experience was to see that the game doesn't support full screen mode, which was something the first game did. The character voices were manipulated to fit the environment of echoing dungeons, but the result was not a pleasant one, at least for me.
アムラ、この部屋には何かあった？あったら今頃他の部屋を漁ってる。それも、そうね。
It is something that definitely took a bit of time to get used to, but after a couple hours or less, I didn't even notice it anymore. Despite these hiccups, it was clear that ZyX had made effort to improve the overall player experience compared to the first game. Though I wish more care was taken towards improving the combat system, I did enjoy much of the game overall. In the end, Lightning Warrior Raidy 2 came out quite a decently good game. There's a large variety of different enemies to strip naked, 42 to be exact, and each of them look well drawn and fantastic in their own unique way. I also liked that some of the old enemies made a return, mostly the ones that were to my liking. Just like with the normal enemies, the amount of bosses in the game is staggering compared to the first title. With each new boss to face, they only got better and better by their hentai scenes for both win and defeat scenario. There is also all sorts of random erotic events outside boss battles which can be discovered by exploring the dungeons. At the end of it all, having searched every corner of each dungeon and secret room I could find, I was left with 37 hentai scenes yet to discover, which was quite a positive surprise seeing how thorough I had been with the game, not trying to rush it. The gallery that unlocks after completing the game will not leave you cold. It is a reward well worth the effort, something which is a pleasure to come back to enjoy every now and then. On top of that, the game's soundtrack contains 38 different background music that simply sound delightful to listen to. I enjoyed them very much throughout the entire game, and I think you will too. So did I enjoy Lightning Warrior 2? Definitely. But I must warn you, it is not for everyone. It is a game that requires both patience and love for dungeon crawling genre. Without it, you will get frustrated for the endless simplistic combat that never offers anything new. There are tedious moments where you feel like the levels were designed by a sadist, just like in the first game. But with so much improvement to the overall player experience, there's much to be appreciated and enjoyed that end up winning you over. That is, of course, if you survive the first game, which gives you a new perspective for the second game. Without it, much of what I have discussed here you may never experience in your own playthrough. Whether that is a good or bad, depends on your own view. Outside the combat, I think that ZyX did a good job with Temple of Desire, and with the price it stands at today, it is quite an easy choice to pick if you lust for some good old school dungeon adventure filled with sexy monster girls waiting to be punished. And with that said, there's one more Lightning Warrior to review. Enter Lightning Warrior Raidy 3. Out of the 3 games, it comes as no surprise that the third and final chapter in Raidy's epic trilogy happens to deliver the best player experience. There was well over a decade in between the second and third game, from which the third game benefited in multiple ways. The game industry had come a long way and technology in general had improved tremendously. Not only that, but ZyX had enjoyed the luxury of time and profits from older titles, which helped to increase their budget to make the third game even bigger and better than ever before. This was the golden title many fans of Lightning Warrior had been waiting for, or so it seemed at first. Having played the first and second game would prove to be fruitful for being introduced to characters that make a return here, who now act as the main companions for Raidy. Fonfon, Foles and This, who are the lovely monster girl trio, add more personality to our hero, as well as for themselves than ever before. Knowing where these characters came from and what they have been through created a completely different experience for me to enjoy for sure. But don't get me wrong, despite all the glory I'm giving this game in advance, Lightning Warrior Raidy is not without its issues. Before I break them to you, one more time, let's begin with the story. Picking up right where the last game left off, Raidy had saved town of Lake Blue, leaving with a new destination, City of Thieves called Vice. The three former bosses from the first game who made their appearance in the second as well have followed Raidy in search of a new home, which she destroyed by defeating their dungeon master. Feeling somewhat responsible, Raidy, though hesitant, allows the monsters to tag along on her new journey. The decision, however, would prove to be too big of a bite to chew, as the three are uncontrollable force, creating trouble in every turn. Their selfish misbehavior eventually leads to a debt for Raidy to pay for a thief guild, caused by a giant food bill at a local inn they stayed at, which was under the guild's protection. Seeing how Raidy can't pay the bill, the guild finds other need for her to make up for it. It just so happens that the guild have lost control over their territory at Waterways, which is now infested with monsters. Not having manpower enough to win it back, they send Raidy to deal with their pest problem, thus giving her a chance to make good for her debt. Let me just say, this idea on its own is marvelous, because it gives Raidy a real reason to go fight monsters rather than the old boring reason, which is, I'm just a nice person so I do it.
Don't ever do that again.
Just expressing myself.
Not like that, you're not.
Some other crazy things happen in between that I won't spoil for you, but what you need to know for the remaining of this review is that Raidy is now capable of merging with her three companions, allowing her to borrow their strength and weaknesses while battling monsters. This time around, the intro before gameplay takes its time to build a strong and interesting story, as well as introduce all the characters and even explain the past events for new players. To understand how long way ZyX had come with Lightning Warrior Raidy 3, you only have to look at the intro to realize it. The story before any gameplay takes well over 2 hours, while in the first game it wasn't even 10 minutes, and in the second it was about 20 minutes at tops. And don't even think that the 2-hour intro is far too long to bear. The story is well written and a ton of fun to enjoy, something which I was more than happy to read. This time the audio quality is polished to meet the expectations of modern standards, so listening to the voice acting actually felt nice for a change.
ねえねえ、ライディ。ねえってば。無視無視。どうせまだろくなことじゃないんだから。無視しないでよ。ライディの年じゃ耳が遠くなったりボケたりするにはまだ早いでしょ。
The character visuals and their designs are as sharp as ever, though I must admit, I have no idea why ZyX insisted to have cheap 3D rendered backgrounds when they could have easily upgraded the visuals on them and created unique 2D backgrounds to fit the characters standing in front of them. I mean, most of them look just fine, but there are a couple I simply find downright ugly and out of place, like, what are those cheap looking 3D characters doing there? They look like something I produced on my first attempt on 3D modeling, not really a good look I must say. Once you finally get to the gameplay, you find that the dungeons in Lightning Warrior Raidy 3 are more thought out than in the previous ones. They are bigger and have a more defined structure of pathways which lead to different events and bosses. What's more amazing to the level design, ZyX finally decided to drop those tedious, pointless rooms that needed to be checked for potential hidden items. How about that? It only took them 3 games to realize how horrible the design was. And if you haven't yet been convinced that ZyX had learned their lesson, they even gave an opportunity for new players to learn about the fake walls in a clever way. Early on you face a small dungeon room with nothing but walls and no path to advance. It forces the player to believe that there must be a fake wall somewhere. This helps the player to come in terms that the game expects the player to check walls for possible hidden paths, rather than demanding the knowledge of this prior to playing the game. Though the level design in the third game seems to have improved in some extent, there still are bad levels beyond tedious to complete. After the first dungeon, the enemies start to appear less in variety per level. For example, Beehive and Antnest use the same 4 enemy types throughout the entire dungeon of 3 different floors, whereas in other games it was always a new set of monsters for each floor. I can only call this lazy from ZyX. What was a promising improvement to level design soon disappointed and turned my hopes to dust. With this next one, I might get ahead of myself, but since we are talking about level design, boss fights are part of it as well. I want to let you know that Lightning Warrior Raidy 3 is one of those rare games where the final boss may become impossible to defeat depending on how you have managed your potions. In the third game, there are no shops. The idea was scrapped and replaced with a single NPC that trades ingredients gained from battling monsters to items and gear. Though it may sound boring, it works quite well to be honest, and I have no complaint of it, other than the fact that once facing the final boss, you can't return to the NPC. The manual saves would take you quite far if you wanted to load and revisit the time when you can access the NPC again. Though I had no problem with this since I was overstocked with potions towards the end, I find it disgusting design to even allow such error to exist in a game. It really shows how little thought was put into both level design and the combat after the glamour of a new game wears off. And if that doesn't convince you how lazy ZyX was, wait till you hear this next one. So you remember how the second game had the gold currency which was used to buy items and gear in shops? Well, it makes a return here as well. Except it doesn't. You can gain gold by defeating monsters, but in the entire game, there's absolutely nothing you can use the gold for. Yes, it appears that ZyX copy-pasted their old system from the second game, but either forgot to delete the gold part or add any content for it.
Look up idiot in the dictionary, you know what you'll find?
Picture me?
No! The definition of the word idiot, which you fucking are!
At this point, I want to get away from the level design and instead let's focus on the combat. What has changed this time around? Well, for one, Raidy is now capable of merging with her 3 monster companions, Fonfon, Foles and Tis. By choosing one of these characters, the two merge together creating a new version of Raidy that can use a unique weapon dedicated to the character who Raidy merged with. Fonfon uses a whip, Foles goes with rapier and Tis carries a trident. These forms come with added benefits like Tis being immune to fire attacks or Foles trading strength over agility, or so it says in my limited edition character cards. It's not like the game made any effort to explain any of this. In the end, none of these different forms really matter because they strip away Raidy's ability to use lightning, which is the godlike skill that literally beats the living crap out of every monster and boss in existence. Why would you want to give up that power? Without it you only have basic attack to use in battle. Not that spamming the lightning would be any more fun, but yeah, imagine having no option at all. Needless to say, the merging feature was doomed to fail from the very start because it really did not add anything meaningful to the combat, rather took away from it. The only things where they shine are the hentai scenes, and I will get back to that later. ZyX ended up throwing this idea to trash after 5 bosses, and for the rest of the game Raidy would explore the dungeons alone with no option to merge anymore. Yeah, thanks. What a great feature. Less is better, right?
Ya están aquí. Miren, bañador. La chancla. Todo despeinado porque no me dio tiempo nada ponerme la chancla y el bañador. Voy a la playa, había subido la marea. Eso. Había subido la marea con triple paella.
This was disappointing despite them being completely useless, since they offered more hentai scenes to enjoy. I tested all the forms only to realize that they were nothing but a poor excuse for difficulty setting, seeing how they added nothing to the combat other than either increasing or decreasing your damage based on the form you use. Everything outside this new idea of Raidy merging with her companions returns back to the old roots of mindless grinding and spamming a single attack button to win every fight. It is as tedious and boring as it was before, and this time I cannot even defend it with the excuse of time. The game came out 2012, which gave the company more than enough examples of well-established combat systems from other games to draw ideas and inspiration from. Look, I get it. ZyX clearly doesn't want to offer a complex or meaningful combat system in their adult game that has a clear main focus on the hentai aspect alone. But does that mean we as paying customers cannot demand for a better experience? I think we can. And I think we should. I dream of a Lightning Warrior game where the combat would be not just a distraction, but an essential part of the game, equal to the hentai. And I want this simply because the player spends a great amount of time in combat compared to the hentai scenes, so why not try to make it more fun and meaningful? With that said, let's continue the review to other aspects of the game. Let's talk about the story for a bit. The story is actually quite well written. This is the best story of the 3 games, hands down, though not perfect of course. The beginning hours were a real treat to enjoy, and the middle part works its way decently towards the end, where unfortunately the story begins to break a little and even becomes somewhat tedious to follow. Perhaps some of that is due to exhausting combat that makes you wish the game would end soon. You should not take the story far too seriously though, because it can lead to a path of disappointment. There are giant plot holes that I would love to discuss here, but it would just spoil the story for you. Just know that while the story is far from amazing, it still manages to deliver a fun time worth to follow. And with that said, we finally arrived at the hentai. It comes without saying that ZyX had succeeded in delivering great hentai experience for their game series. This remains to be true in the third game as well. With more animations and high quality hentai scenes in boss battles, the third game made me wow for how great they were throughout the entire game. The merging of Raidy and her 3 companions open up a new way to experience the same bosses in 4 different styles, both in win and defeat situation, with Raidy alone or when merged with one of the 3 companions. With each form, the scenes transform completely different, never did they feel the same, and for this I give my highest praise for ZyX. If only they had continued this path till the very end, but unfortunately you only get to enjoy this new feature for 5 bosses out of 9, from which 2 the game forces you to pick Fonfon and Foles to be able to win them because the plot requires it. With each boss that uses the merging feature for the sex scenes, one boss can have up to 4 different win and defeat scenes, so up to 8 hentai scenes in total, whereas in the older titles there were only 1 win and defeat scene for each boss. That's quite the improvement, I tell you. The hentai alone is well worth the entry price in my opinion, but there are some downsides to it as well. For you see, the merging of Raidy and her companions does not happen on the fly. You must first visit the world map and enter their location where you choose the form you want to take with you in the dungeon. If you wish to experience multiple sex scenes with one boss, you must save and load and go back to change your form every time. This is a very tedious process, and because of it one would think that it is a better idea to just play the game multiple times having a different form for each playthrough, but believe me, this game is not worth a second playthrough because of the tedious and boring combat. If the combat would be any fun at all, I would not hesitate to play this game more than once, and I think that ZyX really missed out on something wonderful because of this. A second problem I have with this game when it comes to the hentai are the normal monsters you come across in the dungeons. They look very poorly drawn compared to the first and second game, and their designs most of the time are uninteresting looking, especially when naked. Out of 36 monsters I encountered, only 2 were to my liking, and the rest were just a complete disappointment to be honest. I know this is based on taste which is unique to everyone, but if you put the monsters next to each other from the 3 games and compare their quality, you can see clear distinction, I believe. I'm not trying to crap over the artist who drew these monsters, obviously there is talent here, I acknowledge that, but I don't think it belongs to this particular title, I just don't. Since this is an opinion of taste, I would very much love to hear what you think about this. Remember, just because I find it bad doesn't mean your experience will be the same, so take this with a grain of salt. In the end, I find Lightning Warrior 3 a very tiring experience, one that starts really well and promising and delivers amazing hentai through the boss battles till the very end, but with time only gets ever more tedious to complete than the last 2 games thanks to the boring combat. If you are only in for the hentai, I have no doubt that you will get your money's worth with this one, but if you are looking for anything else beyond that, I would consider it twice before purchasing. So, can I recommend it? Yes. But don't get your hopes up too much, otherwise you might be in for a disappointment. Lightning Warrior Raidy 3 looks amazing from the outside, but slowly gets ever more tedious the more you play it. This is a love and hate relationship, an abusive one at that, which promises gold and gives silver instead. It's better than nothing, but it's not what you expected. You either love the hentai well enough to forgive the flaws of the game, or you hate it beyond redemption. And with that said, that was my full review of Lightning Warrior Raidy Trilogy. As you may know by now, I don't give scores for my reviews, I simply recommend or not recommend them. And based on what you have seen here, it might not be so easy to decide whether the games are for you, but I would still encourage you to try at least one of them simply because the price of these games nowadays rests in a fairly low point where you don't have too much to lose, I think. Each game in the series has its fair share of problems, but the hentai never stop to amaze me, and for that reason alone, I'm happy to own them in my physical collection. I still remain a loyal fan to the series with a hope that ZyX will come back with a new Lightning Warrior game with fun and improved combat. If you enjoy girl-on-girl action, there's no better place to experience it than in Lightning Warrior Raidy. Now if you enjoyed this video, give it a like and don't forget to subscribe to learn more about adult games in the future. If you like what I do and want to help the channel grow, consider supporting the show on Patreon.